So, Chris, I hang on every tweet by Katy Perry, the singer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Imagine my surprise this morning when she not only tweeted, but she tweeted about our trade, journalism.
Did she?
Yeah, this is what she said in her tweet this morning. One of my favourite sounds ever is the sound of a crisp new newspaper being read over breakfast for an hour or so. Can't believe this is Katy Perry. The popping out of it, the folding, the scribbling on the crossword. I hope it never goes out of fashion in our digital world. It is too romantic.
Katy Perry is right. I think that's absolutely right. There's something about what's the scrunch? The kind of
in case Katie's watching, I thought or listening, we could do a little sort of ASMR style thing of us.
It's something about the thinness of the paper.
Anyway, so here is 20 seconds of me and Chris silently reading the paper.
Matt Hancock cleaning a toilet and dodging snakes. It's the sound, isn't it? That's what it is.
Shh.
I'm sorry.
You're ruining it. Anyway, that was for you, Katy Perry. And coming up for you in this episode of Newscast, we'll talk about the economy because of the Bank of England's dramatic increase in interest rates today. And we're also going to have a really interesting and powerful chat with the actor Rob Delaney because he's written a very moving book about losing his young son far too soon. And that's all coming up on this episode of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And it's Chris in the studio.
And we're going to start today's episode of Newscast talking about the economy and specifically the Bank of England's decision to raise interest rates. And because we're all about the politics and less about the economics, we've roped in some expert help. We've got Stephanie Flanders from Bloomberg Economics, friend of the podcast. Hello.
Hello, hello.
And another friend of the podcast, Claire Barrett from the Financial Times. Hello.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So, interest rates at 3%, Stephanie. For those of us who aren't steeped in this, what is the economic theory about why interest rates have to be that level right now?
So you have prices going up too fast. We all know that. Inflation. And one of the ways that you can sort of bring down inflation is to have less demand on the economy. And one of the ways you get less demand on the economy is by cranking up interest rates. So you're making mortgages. Those people on variable rate mortgages have less money in their pockets. So they've got less money to spend. So in theory, the economy slows down.
And Claire, that's the kind of macroeconomic stuff. But just give us a sense of how that feeds into real lives.
In terms of money, there's around 2 million people in this country who are on a variable rate mortgage who will immediately see the impact of that 0.75% rise that we've had today, the biggest since the 80s or the 90s, depending on who you believe. And for somebody with the average size mortgage, that's going to add nearly £80 a month or £1,000 a year just from today's rise. And of course, that's the 8th one that we've had in succession from the Bank of England. There's more pain to come for around 2 million people who roll off their mortgage fixed rates next year. And they might see an even bigger rise because they're on a really low rate now and it will be probably higher than it is now next year. So again, somebody with the average size mortgage, they can expect to pay around £250 more a month or £3,000 a year. And that's based on a mortgage debt of £130,000. So obviously, if you've got a bigger mortgage, you're going to have bigger repayments.
Stephanie, I'm trying to work out from listening to the various contributions we've heard today, whether it be Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England or Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, Labour's response about, clearly there's lots of bleak language being used and clearly it's pretty bleak, but how bleak it is relative to expectation. So I'm thinking about, there's lots of talk about this being the longest recession ever recorded, but then how deep is it going to be? And interest rates are going up, but how high might they get?
Yeah, and there's also there's another weirdness about this, right? Which is at the same time as we're talking about a terrible squeeze and a recession, we're not really looking at rising unemployment. So what we've been historically associated with a big recession, lots of people losing their jobs, you are definitely not seeing that. You still have an enormous number of vacancies and not enough people to fill it. A smaller labour market now, smaller number of people working or even wanting to work than before COVID. So it is an odd mixture because we've not seen that since the 70s, right? The sort of just the higher prices without necessarily the economic pain yet. We are looking at more economic pain going down the next year and a half. And as you point out, it looks like it could be a long period where the economy is technically shrinking, but it might not be shrinking that much. What I thought was pretty sort of devastating about the forecast today lots of uncertainty around where we end up. But if it's anything like that, of course, it could be worse. We could have a steeper recession. We will end up about 10% smaller. The economy would be 10% smaller than if we just carried on our kind of expected path before COVID. Remember, we haven't even caught up to where we were in pre-COVID. So you've lost your economy is 10% smaller because you just you've had COVID and then you just haven't recovered like a lot of other countries have recovered.
Yeah, and Claire, I saw you were posting on Instagram with your laptop ready for the announcement from the Bank of England at lunchtime, and I was actually on the train, and so went straight to the Bank of England
You're always
website.
on the train.
Well, I mean, I've got to get to work somehow, and then so went on the website of the Bank of England to look at the monetary policy report, and you actually then get pages and pages of detail, and there's a graph, and if you zoom in on your phone, you can basically see the economy is going to be flat for the next year.
Yeah.
That's basically what they're saying.
Yeah, it's pretty depressing. And of course, Stephanie was saying with the recession, you would expect there would be pain in the jobs market. And obviously that brings an even worse uncertainty for people who have got mortgages. The worry is at the moment is inflation and rates going up. Could the worry in the future be not having a job to earn the income to pay the mortgage? The group of people I'm more worried about at the moment are renters. There's lots of focus on people who have got a mortgage. They're the lucky ones. They're going to end up owning an asset, even if they do have to pay a bit more for it every month than they've been used to for the last few years. But renters are going to get that pain passed on to them through buy-to-let landlords who have higher rates of interest on the properties that they are renting out. Lots of them are also thinking about quitting the market at the moment. There's record demand in the rental market, and people are having to pay more and more, and they're not going to get anything at the end of it.
And Chris, well, all this kind of a real world impact is happening to some people or about to happen to some people. We're kind of politically in a bit of a holding pattern because we're waiting for this autumn statement in 2 weeks.
Yeah, there's this weird sense at the moment of relative political serenity. Everything's relative. There's still all this pressure on the Home Secretary and all the rows that we've talked about on Newscast in the last few days, and obviously these bleak kind of economic clouds. But at the moment, pretty much any answer, any question to the government about anything they're going to do, and certainly anything that is economic, which is pretty much everything, they just defer to, well, wait for that budget moment in 2 weeks' time. But the moment the government is making a virtue out of being boring and saying nothing, given that we've just had a few months of kind of fireworks. But it seems to me, give it a couple of weeks and you get to that moment and there are, difficult decisions for the government to make. And I think politics then sparks up again. And then the fascinating thing is, who do people blame? And particularly when you listen to the Bank of England governor today talking about, it's easier to lose confidence than it is to regain it, and talking about bluntly, what happened under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. It seems to me much easier now for people to blame the government, fairly or otherwise, given what's happened since the summer, than it might have been had that period not happened and the government was able to point, as they still will, to the international picture that is obviously still a huge contributor to the situation we're in.
And let's listen to Andrew Bailey, Governor of the Bank of England, being interviewed by our colleague Faisal Islam, who asked him how much of this is because of the Liz Truss mini budget, remember that, and how much of it is global circumstances and how much of it is stuff from before that.
It's easier to lose confidence and it takes longer to regain it. And I think the UK's position was affected. I was in Washington 3 weeks ago. I think you were in Washington 3 weeks ago. It was very apparent to me that the UK's position and the UK's standing had been damaged, and that we all, and particularly I and others, have to roll our sleeves up and demonstrate that UK policymaking is back in action.
So, yeah, Stephanie, help me work out this mystery about how much of this fiscal black hole that is going to have to be filled with spending cuts and tax rises actually was always going to be there and just no one really told us about it, and how much of it is a direct result of what's happened over the last couple of months, or is it impossible to actually even work that out?
I mean, it's pretty impossible to say. I think that the one thing, there's a few things that did happen. So if you look at the forecast for the last time that the Office of Budget Responsibility did forecast 6 months ago, obviously the cost of borrowing has gone up a lot since then. Not all of that, in fact, most of that has been a global phenomenon, not just the sort of Liz Truss, the moron premium, as it was called in the markets.
Just to
say, in the markets,
yes.
it has been a term of art among investors. I, of course, cannot comment on it, but that's just a phrase.
And just to explain that was the idea that the markets looked at Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and thought, these people do not have a clue what they're doing. We're going to charge them more to lend them money.
Which at one point was sort of £20 billion a year, so not nothing. That has gone away. But I think there is a really important cost, which you can absolutely pin on that period, which goes back to what Andrew Bailey was just saying in credibility. If you're Rishi Sunak and you're looking at a really uncertain situation and you know you've got a bit of a hole, but you don't know how bad the economy is going to be and you don't actually know what the world's going to look like in a year's time, far better to delay some of the pain and use your credibility to delay some of the pain, or maybe do slightly less than you need to do in the end. He has much less room to do that now, because the one thing that can't happen is he can't sit down and have investors start questioning, have the same kind of reaction, or even half of the reaction they had to Kwasi Kwarteng's budget. So that has been the real cost, that he does not have the same room for manoeuvre. And I'm afraid that means, if anything, he will end up overdoing it more, doing more tightening than actually makes sense in an economy that is entering this very weak period.
And Claire, I wonder, from a sort of consumer perspective, when you're answering queries from readers who are saying, well, what can we do about this situation, the sort of agency of the individual in a bleak situation economically, to try and lessen the impact?
Well, I think a lot of people who've got large mortgages and a few years to go on fixed rates are thinking, can we overpay? Can we take advantage of the fact that rates are low now and try and get the loan to value ratio of our property down so that when we come to remortgage again, we can get a better deal?
Stephanie, on yesterday's episode of Newscast, available to listen to now on BBC Sounds, we did a little sort of like supermarket conveyor belt gimmick about the increase in the price of stuff. And it's things like dog food going up by 30% and vegetable oil up by like 40-something%. Did the Bank of England have anything to say today about when inflation might go back to normal?
You know, they got tricky. They're also having to wait to see this fiscal package, because remember that 2-year energy price freeze? Well, the one thing it was going to do, that sort of 2-year freeze on households, it was going to cost a fortune, and that was creating more of a hole a few weeks ago. But it was going to have a big impact on inflation, and it basically was going to mean that inflation would just keep going down from about now. The fact that it technically only lasts for 6 months means, if you sort of take the government seriously, or if you take the current policy seriously, inflation goes back up again, and we have another kind of mini peak quite close to this one, near double digits, in the middle of next year. But even the Bank of England doesn't really think that's going to happen, because they think the government's going to end up helping households again.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid that's what makes it confusing about inflation. If you look 2 years down the road, the Bank of England is expecting, even at these interest rates, they might be more or less close to their 2% target, which would be great news if they hadn't been forecasting that for the last 4 meetings, and they've got it wrong every time. So.
Yeah. Claire, I got a notification from my energy company today that I got my £66 from the government to help with the energy bills over winter. Do we have any intel about how that's working out for people?
Yes, we do. So most people get it automatically. You pay by direct debit. People who've got smart meters, but they're on a prepayment meter, they'll also get it automatically. The people who need to do something are those who take their prepayment card to the shop to be topped up. Now, you will get a voucher for £66 in the post. Lots and lots of people haven't cashed in those vouchers, which is a really big worry, because they're the people who need this money more than anyone. Is it because landlords of properties have got the meters registered to their home addresses and not where the tenant lives, so that the money isn't getting through that way? Is it because people don't realise that they expire within 90 days and haven't taken them to the shop? If you know anyone with a prepayment meter, please tell them about it, because they really, really need to get the cash on those cards before the winter gets cold.
As someone who's spent 20 years trying to tell British Gas that I don't have a prepay meter that was there 20 years ago before the house was renovated and everything else, I know that I'm worried that even just the information about who has a prepay meter, I got my voucher and we haven't had a prepay meter for 20 years. So I worry a little bit about the accuracy even of who it's being sent to.
Oh, so their IT is maybe a bit creaky, and that has a knock-on effect to actual people's lives.
These are the ones who need the cash. So I don't need the cash. Donate the rebate. That's the hashtag campaign that's been started. Give it to a fuel poverty charity if you don't need the money.
Well, Claire, thank you very much for giving us your thoughts tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And lovely to see you as well, Stephanie.
Thank you.
And now we're joined by comedian writer, actor, and I want to say American, Rob Delaney, but then you'll be able to hear that he's American. Hello.
Hi, guys.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So we know you from like watching shows like Catastrophe, where you make us laugh.
Yeah.
Like this afternoon, you were making me quite sad because I was reading your new book, A Heart That Works, which is about the death of your very young son, Henry.
Yeah.
And I'm finding it quite hard to sort of summarize it because I just think anything I say will be really glib or worse, like insensitive to you, the person who's gone through it.
No,
So
I mean,
why don't you just
I
tell
could
us?
summarize it for you. Yeah, I mean, it's about my son Henry's life and death. There, I think I just summarized it. And he died a little before he would have turned 3 in 2018. He had a brain tumor, and they took it out surgically, which disabled him. And then he was getting chemo for a while and treatment, and he didn't, have cancer on paper, as far as we knew, for a while. And then it came back, and it killed him. And that was 4.5 years ago. And of course, it transformed our lives, very dramatically, my wife and his brothers. And I figured, as somebody who's in the public eye, for better or worse, if I told that story, it might help out other bereaved people. And when I say bereaved people, I mean like bereaved parents, bereaved siblings, not grandparents. I don't care about them, or dogs.
Yeah.
But the heavy duty ones. So that's why I read the book.
What it made me realize is obviously the grief and the loss is absolutely awful, but the actual caring can be kind of beautiful and almost nice.
Oh, beautiful is the word for it. Yeah. I mean, we had to learn a lot of stuff to take care of him because the surgeons, when they took out his tumor, they did an amazing job. But because the tumor was wrapped around his brainstem and cranial nerves, he was quite disabled. And so one thing that happened is he had to have a tracheostomy. And when you've got a kid that young, when you've got a 1-year-old at the time with a tracheostomy, taking care of a child like that, it's very difficult. And there's a lot of stuff you need to learn. And so we had to do all that stuff. And it was scary and very difficult to learn. But we did. And then, that became part of how we cared for him, and man, I miss it now, as difficult as it was and as bloody as it was sometimes. It was a privilege to do.
The sheer intensity of the experience you had to go through in such a short period of time. I've got children of roughly the same age, and the intensity of the love, the magnitude of the birth, and the anticipation of the birth, and then so soon after that, you having to deal with something just a million miles emotionally from that, but then wrapped up in love, followed by grief. My goodness.
Yeah, quite a stew of emotions and experiences. And you're right. It was just before his first birthday that we started to see symptoms, and so I talk about it in the book. I was so excited for him to turn 1 because he was our third, and 1 is just such a special age because you can do everything. 1-year-olds can do everything that we can do except talk. They babble and poop in a toilet. They go in their trousers. And so they're amazing, they're very special, and we learn a lot about ourselves and the way we interacted with them. So I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have another 1-year-old. And then days after his first birthday, he had his surgery, and he became a very different kind of 1-year-old. And he sure taught us more than your average 1-year-old and 2-year-old. But it's very, young kids, it's such a physical experience, because they need you so desperately and bodily, you're constantly carrying them. And
that's the other thing about it, because when an adult has a condition like this, it's then about the things that they could do that they then can't do, and they know the difference. But he didn't. So he just grows around his condition in the time that he's got.
Yeah, so he knew he was in pain. He knew he was out of sorts, but he was 11 months old, and then at 1, right away he had the surgery, and then, there's brain damage from that and body damage, and so, but I think the only time you grow faster than 1 to 2 is 0 to 1, and so it was such a time of learning and growth, and he absolutely did learn and grow, but in his own different kind of way.
Because one of the things I've been struck by as a parent, particularly of children of that age, is that you imagine, because they don't have the capacity to articulate everything that they're experiencing, you imagine how they are experiencing a situation that you can articulate, and wondering how they are processing that themselves. And I can relate to that on a trivial level with my own children, and yet you went through it with the intensity of the emotion that you were feeling and your family were feeling, and then I guess wondering what he was feeling.
Yeah, you do wonder, and we can legally speak for our children. We can, medically make the decisions for them. But in fact, they are vast, multifaceted beings, and in Henry's case, yes, his brainstem was damaged, but his frontal lobe was not. And he was very bright and very inquisitive and curious and funny and mischievous. So he had a rich life, inner and outer. And, we have our versions of, what he may have thought and felt, and he learned Makaton, a type of sign language that he, so we communicated certainly. But yeah, the depths of what he felt and knew, that's his business. I'd love to know.
And there's a hilarious bit where you see the two Makaton superstars from the hospital TV channel in the cafeteria, and you're like, oh, can I go and speak to them?
Oh, yeah.
Also, I made the joke about you being American, but that's because in the book you're constantly contrasting the NHS that we have here versus the care that you'd be getting in America, and having to feel for your wallet on the way into the hospital reception.
Yeah, a big gift that the NHS gave our family is time. Because we didn't spend time on the phone with private insurance companies saying, please approve this MRI, or, hey, I went to the pharmacy and they were going to charge us $615 for a bottle of liquid, And so we didn't have to do that. And in America, when you get sick, even if you have private health insurance that you pay a lot of money for, you have those conversations and you lose that time. And I don't want to hang out with an insurance functionary in an office tower in Salt Lake City on the phone. I want to be with my son who's dying. So the sort of mercy and the grace that the NHS affords people in their darkest moments, I now have touched the beating heart of it, and I am very grateful for it.
Well, it's interesting for us as political journalists, because we're used to hearing the arguments about the NHS and about efficiency and how much you spend on it, and then some people in the political world looking at different models and a bit more private involvement. I don't think I've ever really thought about it in terms of the model that we have means, you have time with your relative.
And you can't put a price on that. Now when I negotiate for jobs after Henry's death, the thing I negotiate first is time and how long I might be away or what it requires. Then, if I'm happy with that, I'll move on to money, because time is more important to me now.
The other amazing thing about the book is how many kind people there are out there.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of them work for charities.
Yeah.
Do you think as a country we've got the balance right between the support you get from the state and the fact that you then have to rely on charities for the rest?
No, I absolutely don't think that the balance is correct. I think charities are wonderful, and people are going to have the instinct to do that all the time, and they should have the structures in which to do that. But a big one for us, and I talk about it in the book, not too much because that could be a separate book, but our son, like a lot of people, spent more time living in the hospital than he needed to, because he was well enough to go home, but there wasn't the care in the community. So this is a very strange thing to me, because him home would have cost the government exponentially less money. So,
and freed up the space.
Yeah, it's very odd to me. So, like, if I were, for example, like a lowercase c conservative, I'd be thinking, wouldn't I like to spend less money? Wouldn't I like us as collectively to be spending more money? So there's a dire, deadly, and it's deadly because it kills people, problem with social care, and that should be addressed for the health of the nation and its inhabitants. So that is something bad that's happening right now, and I'd love to, shed some light on that so it can be addressed. But our charity's doing wonderful work. Oh my God. I mean, I'm beaming right now thinking about all the wonderful charities, and
and it's such a good reminder for us as well, that because we think of social care and inevitably you think of older people. Yeah. And it's a good reminder that actually there are much younger people who are in the system too.
It's this sort of a thing where once you know about it and and it doesn't take, these people don't get paid a lot of money, but the hourly rate to pay somebody who can literally watch a kid sleep who has an unsafe airway, it's a lot less than a big hospital room with buzzers and bells and whistles. And so that's something we need to work on.
I wonder where this whole experience, and even describing it in that way sounds glib, for which I apologise, but I just wonder, given what you've lived through, where it leaves your outlook on comedy. Is that a harder place for you to get to, or is it the wonderful escapism which, as a viewer, I might turn on and enjoy seeing you doing something that's funny? Is it a harder place for you psychologically to get to, or an even more important source of escape?
Well, I love that question. It's not glib at all, and it's more important to me now. It was always important, but now it's very interesting because my career in comedy has become right-sized, which is to say it's certainly not the most important thing in the world, but it's not the least important thing in the world. Because I used to be embarrassed about what I did, and I would denigrate it and be like, oh, it's just stupid what I did.
Because it seemed kind of glib and unimportant.
But it, in fact, isn't. It's as important as the people who built this table, who would fix that light if it broke, who will drive us home on the bus from here, whatever.
Because it's part of the human condition.
It's a craft that people need. And that you don't want. Like, if you went home after a rough day and wanted to put on your stories and they weren't there, you'd be very upset.
Yeah, you don't want to watch Schindler's List every night.
Yeah, or you didn't have a funny book to grab or whatever. Yeah. So it's no more important and it's no less important than anything else. And so it's given me a good perspective on that.
And on that note, there are two bits where I properly laughed out loud, and I hope you didn't expect more, or have I laughed enough or two? And I'll tell you the two bits, and so you can share the stories with our listeners. Phoning up the automated phone line at Great Ormond Street to get through to the ward that your son was on.
Yeah. Yes. So the oncology wards at Great Ormond Street are understandably named after animals that kids enjoy, and one of them is giraffe. And they have an automated system where you call up and they just, rather than punch in a number, which I would vastly prefer, I was born in 1977, but you say the thing. So like, which ward would you like to be connected? Say the name of the ward. And so I'd be like, giraffe. And they'd be like, I don't understand, and I'd be like, giraffe, and then finally be like, oh, I get it. Giraffe. And then they were like, yes, here you are, giraffe.
And one of the worst things you can say to somebody is, oh, let me know if there's something I can do.
Oh, that's not the worst. Okay. But it's certain, that's more for you than them. Because I ticked that box and now I can go watch darts. No, it's yes, there is something you can do. It is make a mediocre casserole and ring the doorbell and then run away, or come over and massage my feet. They hurt. Okay, I've been standing in a hospital for a long time. Or I just walked to file my son's death certificate. I'd like a foot massage. You can even clip my toenails.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for writing the book. Thanks for coming in, and also thank you for making it easy for us to talk about this subject, because it's not easy stuff to talk about.
So. Well, you guys are great. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
So next week you're off to Egypt for 2 days to go to COP27.
Yes. So I'm going to experience the climate change conference thing that you had in Glasgow last year, which we're going to have in Sharm el Sheikh, after the Prime Minister decided that he wasn't going to go, then he might go, and then he will go. For his what will be first foreign trip as Prime Minister and first chance to meet fellow world leaders.
You're so excited about your trip to Egypt.
I'm whacking the microphone.
And in the next episode of Newscast, I'll be chatting to Alok Sharma, who's the COP26 president, but will be handing over his gavel to the next person this weekend. So listen into that. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. We'll be back very soon. Bye.
Bye.
Newscast from the BBC.